Right. Hello, and welcome back to Real Seekers Beyond. We're continuing on with my critical thinking and logic course that I'm teaching you guys, an accredited course at a secular university, Ryerson University, where I used to teach. And I taught this course professionally to first year university students as one of their required programs. And yeah, I'm basically giving that course to you guys as part of my Real Seekers Beyond Patreon tier and modifying that course. So basically, I just want to get into it and let's do a recap of what we covered in lecture one in critical thinking. So we basically covered number one, what is critical thinking? And we found out it's the systematic evaluation or formulation of beliefs, arguments, or statements by or in accordance with rational standards. And the key word there is systematic. And by that, we mean that it involves distinct procedures and methods used in accordance with the rules of logic. And we also covered other key definitions. So we found out what statements were versus propositions. So statements are the declarative sentences, the words themselves, that are intended to make either a claim or an assertion, right? Think about it. Declarative sentences are sentences that declare or assert something is true or false, whatever you're asserting, right? It's true that the sky is blue, or I'm making a declarative statement or sentence, and I'm saying it's false that the sky is red. Now, the propositions are refer to the specific ideas or thoughts that the statements intend to express. And we also learned a little bit about arguments and what are the elements that make up an argument. So, in the first place, an argument is a set of statements in which one or more of the statements serve as premises or reasons to think that another statement, i.e., the conclusion, is true. And the conclusion is the statement that the person making the argument wants you to believe. They want you to accept it as a rational agent. And they're providing you reasons, premises, which are the reasons or evidence that you want that other person, the rational agent, to take into consideration, and then on the basis of them, accept your conclusion as being true. And finally, we also looked at an inference, and that refers to the logical moving from the premises. We are able to logically move to the truth of the conclusion and infer the conclusion is in fact true. So these are the key definitions from lecture one. Beyond that, we also looked at the issue of, well, why should anyone engage in critical thinking? We found out what it is, but why should I engage in it? And basically, I laid out 5 reasons. Number one, it ensures our beliefs are true and not false. And we're assuming in this course that having true beliefs is a good thing. And I think most of us believe that as well. Secondly, it empowers us to have more personal freedom in our beliefs, choices, and actions. We have autonomy, more autonomy in the things that we choose to do and believe, and that's a good thing. Thirdly, it provides us with the means to fulfill our most passionate desires, right? We can engage in critical thinking to figure out, hey, if I want X, okay, I need to do Y and Z in order to get X, kind of thing, means to ends reasoning. Fourthly, it provides us with the means to think outside the box. It fosters innovation because we can build on what other people have learned and think critically and put 2 and 2 together to go beyond the current knowledge base that we have and learn something new and to innovate. And that's a good thing as well. But then finally, fifthly, the fifth reason is that it fosters our ability to gain knowledge. And like I said, we're assuming knowledge is a good thing. It's something that we all want to have in the 100% degree. Hey, if I can be omniscient, that's awesome. That's a great thing to do. And it's pleasurable and it's helpful, edifying. It's both intrinsically good and instrumentally good, I would say. And it's this fifth reason, this obtaining of knowledge, we're going to be really focusing in on lecture 2. Okay, what is knowledge? What's the nature of knowledge? What is knowledge all about? Why should I want this and stuff like that? So that's what we're going to be moving on in the second lecture here. So let's get into it. So First question obviously is, great. So I'm going to be obtaining knowledge through critical thinking. What the heck is knowledge? Why should I care about knowledge? And just so you know, so traditionally the study of knowledge is known as epistemology in philosophy. So, you can go into a lot of detail in their entire courses I've taken, and I will be teaching as part of Real Seekers Beyond, both I think, a undergraduate level epistemology course and also a master's level epistemology course. And that's going to come in the future where we go into a heck of a lot more detail. But for the purposes of this course in critical thinking, just understand there is this field in philosophy known as epistemology. And that's the study of knowledge, what it is, how we get it, what tools or methods allow us to gain it. And there are at least three different types of knowledge as taught in epistemology. And sometimes they go by different names, but in philosophy, at least, these are the main categories and what they're called. We have number one, knowledge by experience or acquaintance, right? It's acquaintance knowledge or experiential knowledge. So, for example, babies, they know who their mother and father are just by being acquainted with them, just experientially. They see the face. I know her, even though they don't even have the words to put together. They don't have rational thinking. They don't go, oh, I recognize premise one, that face resembles my mother's. Premise two, faces that resemble my mother's are probably belonging to my mother. Therefore, that's my mom. Babies can't engage in arguments, logical reasoning like that. They just intuitively, through experiential knowledge, mommy, I know you. Daddy, I know you, kind of thing, right? So that's called knowledge by acquaintance or experiential knowledge, right? We have experiential knowledge from the qualia, the internal, what it feels like to experience things. So, when we experience color, there's the qualia of redness, right? That sensation that we have. That's a form of experiential knowledge. I know this pen is red. I'm experiencing redness right now with respect to this object, or blueness if I look at the sky, or greenness, and so on and so forth, or the quality of emotion. I know I'm happy right now, just based on the sensation of happiness that I'm privy to. I have experiential knowledge. I'm happy. The second form of knowledge is called know-how. So this is knowledge of how to do something, how to ride a bike, right? And that's, again, it's inherent. It's not using arguments and stuff like that. It's you just know how to ride a bike. Once you learn, you can't really forget, or how to play chess or checkers, or know how to play baseball. So that's know-how. And both of the above two forms of knowledge are not the object of this course. We're going to be focusing only exclusively on the third form of knowledge known as propositional knowledge. And propositional knowledge is related to propositional beliefs. Remember the difference between statements and propositions, the thought or idea, those propositions, and they form beliefs that we have. So it's primarily knowledge that something is the case, right? I believe that the sky is blue. I have knowledge that the sky is blue, or that David Russell is a heretic. Sorry, just for those who have no idea what I'm talking about, David Russell and Tyler Fowler are a couple of my friends, and they're co-hosts on the Faith Unaltered podcast, which is kind of a religious Christian apologetics podcast. So I use them as examples because they're close friends and stuff. But so there's a good example right there. I know that David Russell is a heretic. Absolutely, not a question, right? So it's knowledge that some proposition is either true or false. And as I said, this is the only type. Propositional knowledge is the only type of knowledge we're going to be talking about and teaching about in this course, at least. If you want to know about the other types, perhaps that will come up in an epistemology course that I do in the future. Now, traditionally, since the time of the Greek philosopher Plato, propositional knowledge has had a specific definition, and it's been defined according to what's called the standard tripartite analysis. Tripartite meaning there's three parts or elements or components that make up knowledge. So what are those three essential components? Well, number one, you've got to have belief. If you're going to know something, you've got to believe that you've got to believe it. And just take a couple seconds and think to yourself, is there anything that I know is true? I know 1 + 1 = 2. I know the sky is blue. I know my birthday is April 19th. Um, can you think of any examples where you are claiming to know something, but you don't believe it? No, there's that constant correlation. If you know something, that automatically entails, well, you must believe that that proposition is the case as well. The second element is that, well, belief alone is not enough for knowledge. There has to be truth, right? So you need a true belief. The belief that you have can't be false. That's not knowledge. We can't know something that's false. So it needs to be true as well. So a true belief. And traditionally, just believe it or not, before Plato, most Greek philosophers, the pre-Socratics and stuff like that, most people kind of assumed, well, true belief, that's it. That equals knowledge. If I've got a true belief, that means I know it. But it was really Plato that revolutionized the field. And he said, no, true belief is not good enough, because maybe you just know something through a happy accident, right? If I just guess that, I don't know. Let's think of, if I just guess that there's a garbage truck outside of my condo right now picking up some garbage, and let's just say that I happen to believe that, and it turns out to be true. It's just a happy accident. I have no real knowledge that the garbage truck is out there. I'm just guessing, and it just so happens I was correct in this case. So true belief, there needs to be something else, a third element. And that's what Plato said was justification. In other words, you need to have good reasons to rationally believe that a given proposition is true. And together, those three elements, justified true belief, that's what the tripartite definition of propositional knowledge. And that's been the definition of propositional knowledge since the time of Plato for thousands of years, until the 20th century. Basically, in the 20th century, in 1963, a famous philosopher, Edmund Gettier, published a paper called Is Justified True Belief Knowledge? And he just revolutionized and turned epistemology on its head, because he raised certain counterexamples. They're called in philosophy today Gettier type counterexamples. And these are counterexamples to the standard tripartite definition of knowledge. They basically provide examples whereby a given person does indeed have a justified true belief, or is claimed to have a justified true belief, but yet it's clearly insufficient to say that that person knows that that proposition is true or false. And I'll just give a quick example. This is based on one of Gettier's own examples, but I've modified it. So David Russell, beloved David Russell, good old heretic there. And let's say he's sitting down and he's watching the Stanley Cup, where the Toronto Maple Leafs, yay Toronto, I'm a Canadian here, are playing against the New York Yankee Rangers. And this is the second straight year in a row that the Toronto Maple Leafs are facing off against the New York Rangers in the final game of the Stanley Cup. And so Mr. Russell, he's watching the Leafs crushing the Rangers. They're beating them. And then he sees the Leafs score the final goal before the game finally ends. And bada bing, bada boom, the Leafs win the Stanley Cup. Of course, Canadians way better than Americans. That's just obvious. But on this basis, because he's seen it on TV, let's say Russell forms the belief that the Leafs won the Stanley Cup on this basis. However, unbeknownst to David Russell here, the telecast was actually stopped due to a technical glitch, and the network accidentally aired the previous year's Stanley Cup of the Leafs versus the Rangers. And once again, in that year's game, it was the same thing happened. The Leafs ended up beating the New York Rangers that year as well. So in this case, Mr. Russell not only has a belief, he has a true belief. And on the basis that he have good reasons? Well, he's forming it on the basis of seeing a live, what he believes is a live broadcast. And typically that's a good reason. You see it on live TV, it's probably correct. If you see a sports team winning on TV, technical glitches don't usually happen. So yeah, David Russell would be justified in this case. He would have a justified true belief because he does have good reason to believe the Leafs winning over the Rangers on the Stanley Cup. He has good reason to believe that's true. But yet, in this case, it doesn't seem that he actually knows. It's insufficient. Justified true belief doesn't seem to warrant saying, and Mr. Russell actually knows that the Leafs won against the Rangers this year. So that's one of his examples, and he gives other counterexamples. Another good counterexample would be, okay, well, let's say I form the belief that it's 2 p.m. by looking at a broken clock. And let's just, for the sake of argument, say that it's true that it is 2 p.m. And I've got a good reason. I mean, clocks are usually and typically accurate, at least when they're working in that. And I just quickly glanced at the clock, so I didn't realize it was broken. So in this case, I would have a justified true belief that it's 2 p.m. But it's insufficient for knowledge. There's something wrong. There's something missing almost, or something. It's clearly insufficient. And I think that's clear from these Gettier type counterexamples. Now, in response to these Gettier type counterexamples, how have philosophers in epistemology responded to these counterexamples? And essentially, there are 4 different strategies in response to Gettier type counterexamples. And we're going to look at that now. So the first strategy is what I call the double down and deny strategy. So this is the strategy that basically retains the notion that knowledge, and again, whenever I use the word knowledge in this course, we're talking about propositional knowledge specifically going forward, right? So bear that in mind. Knowledge, we retain a notion. No, knowledge is a justified true belief. We maintain that standard tripartite definition. Well, how can we do that in light of the counterexamples? Well, we must deny the Gettier counterexamples as a defeater for the standard definition. Well, how do they do that? Well, they claim that in each of these cases, good old Mr. Russell watching his hockey game, even though it seems like he's justified, really he's not. He lacks justification. And in that way, we can say these counterexamples don't disprove that propositional knowledge equals justified true belief. Because in each of these counterexamples, we mistakenly think these people have justification, but they don't. Really, it's obscured. And if we really got into the weeds, we would realize David Russell is totally unjustified in believing the Leafs won against the Rangers on the basis of what he saw on the TV recording there. So that's the first strategy. And just note, for the purposes of this course, this is the strategy that we're going to be employing going forward. We will be assuming in this course that propositional knowledge or knowledge proper equals a justified true belief. Now, obviously, there are pros and cons against the different strategies. Again, that's for a different course, maybe in an upcoming epistemology course where I maybe will go into more details about the pros and cons for each of these strategies. And certainly I myself, I don't believe in strategy number 1. But to keep things simple, again, it's a first-year university course. For the sake of argument, for this course, we will be assuming that strategy 1 is correct and knowledge is defined as a justified true belief. But before we get into that, what are some of the other strategies, just so you're kind of aware of what's out there? Well, the second strategy is that you can add more epistemic criteria. So basically, proponents of this strategy, in response to Gettier counterexamples, they accept the Gettier counterexamples as valid. They say, yes, these counterexamples prove that justified true belief is insufficient for knowledge. And what their strategy is they say, well, justified true belief is necessary. So you still need to keep knowledge equals justified true belief, but there's something missing that needs to be added as a criteria in order to count as knowledge. So this is really the view, the justified knowledge equals justified true belief plus something else. Usually it's a fourth criterion, but maybe there's 5 or 6 or 7. But essentially, the notion here is that justified true belief is indeed necessary for knowledge, but it's insufficient. You need to add one or more epistemic criteria to justified true belief in order to have knowledge. And here's one such example of this strategy in practice. It's called the justified true belief plus no relevant falsehoods. So this kind of would take into account David Russell's example, right? Remember that heretic that watching his Stanley Cup game. Under this would take care and solve Russell's problem. Why doesn't David Russell have knowledge, even though he has a justified true belief that the Leafs won against the Rangers? It's because he also has relevant falsehoods. He falsely believes that the hockey game he's watching is truly live, representing this year's game, but he's mistaken because that's actually a recording from last year's game. So this strategy says, in addition to justified true belief, there can't be any relevant falsehoods involved in the formation of Russell's belief that the Leafs won the Stanley Cup against the Rangers this year. So that's one such example. There are many others, sub explanations. Again, you don't need to know that for this course, but I'm just explaining it to you so you can see how some people solve it. Then there's the third strategy. This is my baby. This is my favorite. This is the strategy I personally take. And it's basically you've got to replace the justification epistemic criteria. So proponents say that, look, justified true belief is not necessary for knowledge. True belief is, but justification, throw that in the garbage. And they replace justification with some other epistemic criterion or criteria, if there's one or more epistemic criteria that are involved. And this forms a new definition of knowledge. So in this case, you can see knowledge equals question mark plus true belief. And I said, this is the strategy I go for. I plug in, I yank out justification, and I put in a reliabilist criterion called warrant. So I believe knowledge equals a warranted true belief. Basically, and essentially in a nutshell, warrant just refers to beliefs that are produced by reliable and properly functioning truth-producing faculties that are successfully and functioning properly designed faculties. Designed for what? To produce true beliefs. And they're in the proper environment. That's what warranted is. So that's my strategy, right? I would plug in for this question mark, I yank out the justification, and I would plug in warrant. A warrant, knowledge equals a warranted true belief. Finally, here's a very interesting strategy that's really kind of new as of the 21st century, I would say, becoming popularized by philosophers like Timothy Williamson. And this is the strategy that says, look, you fools, you've got it all wrong. The tripartite analysis and breaking up, well, knowledge equals true belief plus X, Y, or Z, that's all wrong. Knowledge is just basic. It's not made up of components like belief and truth plus warrant plus justification plus no relevant falsehoods. That's a complete category error, complete mistake. Knowledge, like beliefs, are just basic mental entities. Knowledge isn't composed of ingredients. And this is a really radical position, and it denies, like I said, that knowledge is made up of components or ingredients at all. Knowledge is just a basic or foundational mental entity itself. And this is called what's come to be called knowledge first epistemology. And I just want to show a 10-minute clip here explaining these different strategies to knowledge and getting into the knowledge is basic categories. So let me bring that up here.
My name is Jennifer Nagel, I teach philosophy at the University of Toronto, and today I want to talk about marks a reversal from the kind of epistemology that got started with Edmund Gettier in 1963, which is now, looking back, sometimes called belief-first epistemology. Let's explore that label. Belief-first epistemology starts with belief and asks what you have to add to it in order to get knowledge. Everyone notices right away that false beliefs don't look like knowledge. So the equation generally starts out as knowledge equals true belief plus X. We've seen from the last few videos that there are many proposals for X, but it's very hard to come up with one that stands up under pressure and isn't open to counterexamples. Some candidates for X got very complicated. Other candidates for X were simpler, but generated counterintuitive results. After 30 years of struggling to come up with a good story about what had to be added to belief to get knowledge, some philosophers started to wonder whether belief-first epistemology was a bad idea. In a 1994 paper entitled The Inescapability of Gettier Problems, epistemologist Linda Zagzebski argued that we were never going to come up with a good analysis of knowledge as true belief plus something else, where the something else can't smuggle in the idea of knowledge, which would make the analysis circular, and can't already guarantee the truth of the belief, which would mean the right-hand side of the analysis had a big redundancy. The JTB, or justified true belief analysis, wasn't redundant. Justification in Gettier's picture really is something interestingly different from true belief because he thinks you can have a justified false belief. We also know that JTB isn't a circular analysis. JTB doesn't already sneak in the idea of knowledge because it's possible to have justified true belief without knowledge. For example, in Gettier's classic cases, which are counterexamples to the JTB theory. Many philosophers then wondered why knowledge was so resistant to analysis. Here's one idea. Sometimes a concept resists analysis because it is basic, like a prime number which can't be factored into simpler components. Perhaps philosophers went wrong in thinking that belief was one factor in knowledge, a factor to which other independent ingredients had to be added. Perhaps knowing is more primitive and believing is a spin-off from it. This is actually an old idea, perhaps as old as Plato, but in recent years it's been revived by Oxford philosopher Timothy Williamson. Everyone agrees that believing is a mental state. Williamson argues that knowing is also a mental state in its own right and not just a compound of believing plus non-mental factors like causal connections. Williamson agrees with the majority view that knowing entails believing. So if Alice knows that it's raining, she also believes that it's raining. And you might think this has to mean that believing is just an ingredient in knowing together with other factors. That would make believing something more basic, a building block that's included in knowledge, but also in other conditions like false belief. Think of water. It's more common and more basic than orange mocha frappuccino, in which it figures as one ingredient among many. If there were no water, there'd be no orange mocha frappuccino. Likewise, if no one had any beliefs, there would be no knowledge. This ingredient model is not the only one to follow, however. Maybe the relationship between belief and knowledge isn't like the relationship between water and orange mocha frappuccino. Think instead about the relationship between the geometrical concept of the circle and the looser everyday concept of being somewhat rounded. Rounded things are more common in reality, but the concept of the circle is more basic. It's simpler, and we understand roundedness as some kind of approximation to circularity. Anything that's a circle will be rounded, but it's not because circles are made up of roundedness plus other ingredients which are independent of circularity. Well, Williamson sees belief as some kind of approximation of knowledge or attempt at knowledge, an attempt that can fall short of the mark in many ways. Knowing sets the standard that believing should ideally meet, and believing a proposition P is pretty much a matter of treating that proposition as if you knew it. On his view, knowledge is the most basic concept in epistemology. Belief is a spin-off. When you've hit knowledge, you've hit bedrock and can stop digging.
Okay, so that that covers the 4 different strategies. Now, again, just understand going forward in this course, we are assuming the first strategy, we will be assuming that knowledge, aka propositional knowledge, is defined by the traditional standard tripartite definition. It is a justified true belief, and we'll be just assuming that's the case going forward. Okay, great. So here's kind of a helpful visual giving you guys the breakdown so you can see knowledge equals what. What is knowledge? Well, you have this option, knowledge first epistemology, where knowledge is basic. It's not composed of further components. Or the other strategy, the traditional one, knowledge is not basic. It's made up of further components, breaking it down. And you have the 3 strategies here. This is the one we're taking in this course. Knowledge equals justified true belief. We're doubling down. Then you have knowledge equals justified true belief plus something else. And then the third strategy, the replacement strategy, knowledge equals something new. Get rid of justification, and it equals something plus true belief. And then I give the 2 examples. So this is a helpful visual way of just seeing what we covered in the last slide. Okay, so let's move on. Assuming knowledge is a justified true belief, let's look in a little more detail at each of the 3 elements that make up propositional knowledge. First, let's start with truth. What is truth? And there are many different notions as to what truth is. In fact, there are dozens in philosophy. I'm going to cover just 2 in this course for you guys for helpful compare and contrast purposes. But the one we're going to be assuming in this course, and this is the one that by far the majority of logicians and philosophers take, is called the correspondence model of truth. Now, the correspondence model states that a proposition is true if and only if it corresponds to the facts of reality or corresponds to reality. So in other words, if you think of a proposition as a truth bearer, right? A proposition or a statement, a declarative sentence, it bears the truth. It bears up what is stated, being asserted to be true. And it can be either the truth bearer can either be true or false, right? When that truth bearer, when the proposition or statement stands in a correspondence relation, in other words, it corresponds, it matches with a truth maker. What's the truth maker? Well, that's the objective fact of reality, right? Reality, whatever the fact is. If I say the sky is blue, the proposition or my statement, the words, the sky is blue, is the truth bearer. And if that corresponds to the objective facts of reality, well, the sky is in fact blue, the sky itself. That serves as the truth maker. It makes the proposition true. The facts of reality, objective facts of reality, make the truth bearer or the proposition true. So that's the core, in a nutshell, that's the correspondence model of truth. And by far, the vast majority of philosophers, atheists, Christians, skeptic, whatever they are, they all agree with the correspondence model of truth. This has been the notion of truth for millennia. I mentioned that, but there are many other theories, dozens of other theories. So let's just provide another one just to help you give a compare and contrast to kind of see what is an example of another understanding of truth. And another popular one is called the coherence model of truth. Now, the coherence model states that a proposition is true if and only if it is coherent or consistent with a system of other well-supported propositions that you share, propositions or statements. Otherwise, if it's inconsistent, then it is false. So here's an example. The Faith Unaltered hosts, David Russell and Tyler Fowler, have 3 heads each. That's my proposition or statement. That's my truth bearer that I'm wanting you guys to accept, right? Now, obviously, this statement or proposition is false. Why? Well, you could say on the correspondence theory, because it doesn't correspond with the facts of reality. And in reality, it's just a fact. David Russell has 1 head. Tyler Fowler has 1 head. They don't have 3 heads each. But under the coherence model, you can't appeal to objective facts. That's not the basis for truth. Instead, you appeal to, okay, well, is the proposition that David Russell and Tyler Fowler have three heads each, is that consistent with my other well-supported beliefs or other propositions that I believe to be true in my head? If it's consistent, then it's true. If it's inconsistent with my other well-supported beliefs and propositions, then it's not true, then it's false. So in this case, you would say, well, it is false that David Russell and Tyler Fowler have three heads each. Why? Because this statement is inconsistent with my other well-established beliefs or other well-established truth bearers, right? I have beliefs that I've formed, they only have one head each based on my observations of them, or based on my well-established beliefs in human biology. Humans typically don't have three heads each. So this would be inconsistent, and so on and so forth. So essentially the coherence model is asserting that, okay, so that's wrong. It should say a truth bearer. The coherence model has no truth makers. There are no truth makers about objective reality. There are only truth bearers. So the coherence model asserts that a truth bearer is true if and only if it stands in a coherence relation with other well-established truth bearers. So you can see there's no role for a truth maker in the coherence model of truth. Now, just a reason, why are we assuming the correspondence model, aside from scholarly consensus and common sense as well? Well, there are various problems with all the other theories that come out, and here are some of the drawbacks with the coherence model of truth. So, for example, mere coherence or consistency with other beliefs is clearly insufficient for truth. Just remember for example, there's example of the Matrix or Rene Descartes' dream world where everything's an illusion. We're in a virtual world. Well, I may believe in that world that I'm actually eating an apple right now. And you could say, well, that's true because it's perfectly consistent with all of my other well-established beliefs that I've gained from living in this matrix or dream world, right? That world, it looks real to me. So I believe I've eaten lots of apples in the past. I believe apples are little round red things. I believe as a human being, I'm capable of eating little red round things and stuff like that. So all of my other well-established beliefs are perfectly consistent with this new belief that I'm eating an apple. But it's clearly not true because it's all an illusion. We're all in this dream world, this matrix. I've never eaten an apple in my life. So clearly the coherence model is insufficient, provably insufficient for truth. But it gets even worse for the coherence model of truth. Not only is it insufficient, the coherence theory is not even necessary for truth. In order for a proposition to be true, it doesn't even need to be at least consistent with our other well-established beliefs. So, think about this. Modern science would be impossible if the coherence model of truth were true. Let's say we gain new evidence, and it's a totally unprecedented belief. Think of quantum physics. All of our other well-established beliefs rule out quantum physics. We would have to never believe in quantum physics or relativity theory or something like that because that is inconsistent with all of our other prior beliefs from Newtonian physics or the physics behind that. We never would have accepted Newtonian physics to begin with. We'd be living back in the Stone Ages with Plato and Aristotle and stuff like that. So, or on a more personal level, think of, your spouse. Tyler and David are both married. So use them again, right? They're both married. Tyler, do you trust your spouse? I mean, sure. Let's say you gain new evidence that your spouse is cheating on you. Well, that can't be true because everything else all of your other well-established beliefs about your spouse prove that she's loyal to you and would never cheat on you. Therefore, it can't be true that your spouse is cheating on you. The hell with the new evidence. I dismiss it. Well, that's not correct. If you've got new evidence that is sufficiently strong to prove that it's true, your spouse is cheating on you, you better change your beliefs, regardless of whether that's consistent or inconsistent with your prior beliefs about your spouse, right? So yeah, the coherence model is an utter failure. not only is it insufficient, but it's not even necessary for truth. And this is one of the reasons why we go by the correspondence model of truth. It doesn't suffer these problems. So, yeah, that's where we're going to be assuming the correspondence model of truth. Now, taking the correspondence model of truth, there are various positions that people take regarding truth. People can be a mixture of these positions depending on the subject, right? So, for example, the first position related to truth is realism. So, realism is the position number one that there are in fact truths in a given subject area and or in all subject areas, whatever you're a realist about. So I could be a realist about mathematics, and I say there are truths in mathematics. Or I could be a universal realist. Well, every single subject, uh, there are truths to those subjects. But not only do you have to say there are truths, but you also affirm that these truths are objective, meaning they're belief or person independent. They correspond to objective facts of reality, right? So you can see the correspondence model kind of fits best with realism there. But yeah, so that's what realism is. It has those two aspects. Number one, it affirms there are truths. Number two, it affirms those truths are objective in nature. And this fits great with a lot of math, with science, medicine, history, or I assume you as a student. I know this is on Patreon and stuff like that, but this is also a course. So I would use this example with my students when I taught in course. Look, I assume you students, when you take a test and I'm grading your test, you're going to be a realist about your grades, right? That I'm going to be assigning you. You're going to want me to say, no, I'm going to assign you the grade that you truly deserve, that matches and corresponds to objective reality. You don't want me, well, it looks like the facts support that you got an A plus, but I believe you got a C minus, so I'm going to assign you a C minus. No, you're going to be a realist about those grades. But some people will question certain subjects and they'll say, well, realism doesn't fit those subjects, things like ethics and morality or religion or what foods taste good, stuff like that. So yeah, some people may deny that you can't be a realist about every single subject. And that's where the other positions come in. So the other position is nihilism. And this is the position that it flat out denies there are no truths whatsoever. Truth doesn't exist, either in some or in all subject areas. What would be some examples where there may be no truths? Well, Dr. William Lane Craig, and I disagree with him, but he would say, for example, well, statements or propositions about the future. If we exist on an A theory of time and the future doesn't exist yet, it doesn't make sense to say that there are truths about this, right? And not to go into religion, but certain open theists or dynamic omniscience people, this is what they are technically nihilists about certain future tense propositions. They say there are no truths about on those subjects and stuff like that. Now, I personally disagree with that. I'm a realist pretty much about everything, with maybe a couple of exceptions where I'm a relativist, but I am a nihilist about virtually nothing. I guess I'm a nihilist about questions. If I ask a question, as we saw, that's not a statement. It doesn't have a truth value. That's just a sentence asking a question. So yeah, questions, commands, exclamations, you might say, yeah, those are quote unquote subjects, if it's proper to call them that, where nihilism would fit, right? Because there is no truth value to a question or giving a command. Or if I exclaim, go to hell, or something like that, nihilism fits. Like it's not true or false that go to hell. Yeah. So that I guess I am a nihilist about certain things, about questions and stuff like that. Even though I'm not a nihilist I'm a realist when it comes to, with respect to future tense propositions in all of them. But yeah, again, beyond my own biases, some people are moral nihilists, right? They say there is no truth with respect to morality. Friedrich Nietzsche and stuff like that. Now, the one thing I want you to get here is that it's self-defeating and impossible to be a universal nihilist. You can't deny that there are no truths at all in any subject area at all. Why? Because that's self-refuting. Essentially, you're saying, well, there is one truth, and it's the truth that there are no truths. That's logically contradictory, impossible to be true. By affirming that universal nihilism is true, you're proving that universal nihilism is false, because there's one truth, at least one truth that exists. And that's contradictory to saying there are no truths. One versus zero, they're different numbers. So yeah, just remember that. But then there's the position which is highly popular amongst millennials and stuff. There's relativism. Oof, what a yucky word. But no, there's relativists in this world, right? And they are people that they agree with the realists on proposition one. There are indeed truths. They agree that there's truth. They're not nihilists in either in some or all subject areas, but they deny or differ on the second aspect with realists. They say there are truths, but those truths are subjective or relative, either to the beliefs of individuals, this is known as subjective relativism, or to the beliefs of entire societies and cultures, and this is known as social relativism. So there are those two forms of relativism. So again, the key here, relativists say there are indeed truths, at least in some or all subjects, but those truths are subjective or relative. They're not objective like the realist claims. So what would be some good examples of this? Well, a lot of people would be relativists when it comes to taste or food. I'm not sure I would agree. I mean, it's just an objective fact that pizza is amazing. Chocolate ice cream, if you don't like it, something's wrong with you, my friend. But yeah, a lot of people would say, look, taste what foods you like. That's something the truths are purely subjective to individuals. Things like humor and comedy. Some people have argued, oh, well, that's relative to the beliefs of societies and cultures. It was really funny to make racist jokes back in the 1940s, but it's not so funny today. And in fact, people will be really upset with you if you make racist jokes and stuff. I would say in some cases going way too far with that. But things like beauty or religion, there's a whole host of things that you might think that, yeah, these are subjects where relativism is the best fit. Now, here's the thing again. Can you be a relativist about all subject areas? Nope. Because again, it's self-defeating in exactly the same way that universal nihilism is. Another word for universal, sometimes it's called global nihilism, global relativism, versus local nihilism or local relativism, which just say certain subjects, I think relativism is true, or in certain subjects, I think nihilism is true. Those are localized, local versions of those theories. But universal relativism, number one, it sounds tolerant, but it's really intolerant. For example, it will promote slavery and racism and stuff like that. But it teaches that individuals are, it's self-defeating because it teaches that it's an objective fact that all truths are relative. Well, you can't have all truths being relative or subjective, and yet you have zero truths. Relativism teaches that zero truths are objective, but at the same time, you're affirming there's at least one objective truth, namely that all truths are relative or subjective. So it's contradictory in that way. But really another problem with relativism, especially universal versions, is that it teaches that individuals or societies are infallible. You can never be wrong or have a false belief. There's no need for compromise. It makes progress impossible. Look, scientific progress, throw that in the garbage. Einstein, I disagreed with you about relativity. Therefore, it's not true. Maybe relativity is true for you over there, Einstein. It's not true for me. And I think as a society, scientific progress would be impossible under universal relativism. So these are really problematic positions. Now, as I said, me personally, I'm a realist about most, virtually every subject. There may be one or two, like I said, I take a nihilist position on some subjects, such as like questions or giving commands and stuff. There's no truth value for those. I am a realist with respect to future tense propositions. Am I a relativist about anything? I'm not sure. I've made an argument whereby I think there is an objective fact with things like beauty and even taste in food would follow. If my argument for God from beauty follows, that would also apply to aesthetic tastes about food and stuff like that, or comedy and stuff. So I personally, I think I'm a realist pretty much about everything, or virtually everything. But again, this is in this course, you don't have to agree with me and my thing. Maybe you disagree. Maybe you do think there are some subjects where relativism is the best fit. And again, I'm not going to be grading anyone. This is on Patreon and stuff, but I usually tell my students, as long as you can provide reasons and defend your opinion on which subjects fit which position, you'll get full marks. It doesn't matter whether you agree with me personally or not. So yeah, think about this yourself. If you're watching on Patreon, what subjects do you think fit these various positions on truth in relation to the nature of truth? So yeah, okay, so let's move on to belief, the second component. Now, what is belief? Basically, when you consider any proposition or statement, you have only three basic, and it's important to note they are mutually exclusive options, at least in terms of mutually exclusive, at least with respect to a given time. Meaning you can only take one of these three basic positions. You can't have two or more of them, okay? At least at a given time. You can change your mind over time. So for example, what are the three positions firstly? Firstly, you can believe a proposition is true. Namely, what is belief? It means you think that that proposition or statement is true. Secondly, you can disbelieve the proposition or statement. You can disbelieve. You can think that the proposition is false. Thirdly, you can suspend judgment. You can be neutral and agnostic, as it were. You neither believe nor disbelieve. I don't know. I don't have any disposition towards this proposition at all. Maybe it's true, maybe it's false. Don't know, don't care. I'm neutral. So those are the three positions. And as I said, they're mutually exclusive, meaning you can only believe or disbelieve or suspend judgment at any given time. You can't believe and disbelieve at the same time, or you can't believe and suspend judgment at the same time, or you can't disbelieve and suspend judgment at the same time. Those are impossible. However, it is possible to adopt more than one of these positions over the course of time. So maybe as children, we originally believed that it was true that Santa Claus existed. Now, as adults, we've changed. In light of new evidence, we now disbelieve that it's true that Santa Claus exists. No, it's false that Santa exists. Now, this in philosophy, this is called the belief principle. Okay, the fact that there are only these three mutually exclusive at any given time positions: believe, disbelieve, or suspend judgment. Now, it's important to note that beliefs and disbeliefs come in varying degrees of confidence or certainty. And these varying degrees depend on how weak or strong one's confidence in the truth or falsity of that proposition is. Okay, so this degree of confidence, this is what philosophers call a credence, right? How weak or strong, the degree that you believe something is true. So for example, my credence that 1 + 1 = 2 is a heck of a lot stronger and way higher. I have a lot higher degree of confidence or credence that 1 + 1 = 2 versus my belief that, I don't know, some obscure historical fact from the 1300s is true, such as, the medieval knight Geoffrey de Charny, or he knew that the Shroud of Turin was authentic. okay, my belief that that's true is far weaker, given the evidence, far weaker, sorry, than my confidence that and believe in my belief that 1 + 1 = 2. And it's the same with disbelief. There are these degrees depending on um, how confident you are. This is not about evidence or your level of justification. So this is just about, well, how strongly do you believe something, or weakly do you believe something? How strong do you disbelieve something, or weakly disbelieve something? So that's what credence refers to: the strength, the relative strength of your confidence in the truth or falsity of a given proposition. Okay, with that said, let's move on to the next component, justification. And you're going to see how these relate. Justification and belief are really important. So justification refers to one having good reasons to rationally believe a proposition is either true or false. And what constitutes good reasons is really related to whether or not you have sufficient evidence in support of the proposition's truth or falsity, right? So evidence here is defined as information which pertains to the truth or falsity of a given proposition. And we have a couple of principles that are important here, right? So the first one is what's called the principle of rational or justified or reasonable belief. We'll just, for the sake of argument, call that RJR belief, the principle of RJR belief, according to Richard Feldman. But yeah, to simplify it, you might say, okay, well, the principle of justified belief, what is that? Well, it states, A, if a person's evidence concerning a proposition supports that proposition to a sufficient degree, then it is rational for the person to believe the proposition. B, if the person's evidence goes against the proposition, then it is rational for the person to disbelieve the proposition. Finally, C, if the person's evidence is neutral and or non-existent, then it is rational for the person to suspend judgment concerning the proposition. And for an example there, you might ask, well, how many stars are in the Milky Way galaxy? Or if somebody presents, there are an even number of stars in the Milky Way galaxy. If your evidence is neutral, or if it's just non-existent, it's reasonable to, the reasonable person states that you should suspend judgment. I don't know. Maybe it's even, maybe it's odd. I have no clue, kind of thing, right? So these three positions, this is what's called the principle of rational, or the principle of justified belief. But in terms of justification, that's not enough. We need to go further. And Richard Feldman adds a further principle called the principle of proportional belief. And this principle, remember what we talked about above with belief and the degrees of credence or confidence the one has. The principle of proportional belief applies to those credences, right? So it's not enough to just, okay, well, I believe something, or I disbelieve it, or I suspend the judgment. You also have to look at the credence or the degree of belief or disbelief you have. And this principle states, it is rational to proportion the strength of one's degree of belief or disbelief, aka the degree of credence or confidence, either as a belief or as a disbelief, to the strength of one's evidence for or against the proposition's truth. The stronger one's evidence for or against a proposition is, the stronger one's either belief, or on the opposite end, disbelief in it should be. So this principle of proportional belief, this is what underpins the position in epistemology known as evidentialism, right? We apportion, as David Hume said, we apportion our belief accordingly, our level of credence according to the degree or strength of the evidence we have for or against it, right? And if it's against it, then okay, you apportion your disbelief in accordance with the strength of the evidence against that proposition. And this is in epistemology, this is a position called evidentialism. And we're just going to be assuming that evidentialism is true for the sake of this course. But obviously, the principle of proportional belief is really one of the strongest philosophical principles or arguments or bits of evidence supporting the evidentialist position. And in a future course on epistemology, in part of my master's course, I'll be teaching you about the pros and cons of some other positions outside of evidentialism. So, for example, there's pragmatic encroachment theory, which denies the principle of proportional belief. It says, no, actually, forget the evidence. That's not as important. You should proportion your belief according to the practical stakes at stake. You don't need to know any of that for this course. I'm just giving you a primer for future ones. But just understand, it's this principle of proportional belief that underpins evidentialism. Okay, so here's a helpful visual way of relating these principles of belief, principle of rational, reasonable, or justified belief, and the principle of proportional belief together. So right here, you have this is the line for belief, suspending judgment, and disbelief. So this is kind of the line representing the degree of credence or confidence in terms of our beliefs or disbeliefs, right? So here in the middle, you have suspend judgment. You don't know. Maybe it's true, maybe the proposition's false, you don't know. On this side of the line, you have the belief line, right? So on this side, you have B, you should believe that the proposition's true. And you have the various lines or degrees of credence that you can have. This is a weaker line. This means you have a stronger level of belief, a stronger degree of confidence or credence. On this side of the line, for the principle of belief, we have the disbelief side. So this is saying that you very strongly disbelieve, you have a very strong level of disbelief credence. Whereas here you have a slightly weaker level of credence for disbelief, or the opposite of credence, right? This weaker level of disbelief in the proposition versus a stronger level of disbelief in the proposition. This second line represents the level or degree of evidence we have for or against the proposition. So once again, here in the middle, this is saying that, well, the evidence, you either have no evidence or the evidence you have on both sides is neutral. It's a tie. You can't decide whether to believe or disbelieve. And in that case, okay, the answer is, well, you should suspend judgment. According to the principle of proportional belief, these should match. Well, the evidence is neutral. It's in the middle. Therefore, you should adopt, as the principle of proportional belief states, the rational person would suspend judgment in that case. But let's say you don't do that, right? You have a mismatch. So let's say you personally believe something, this blue line, but the evidence is way over here. It's really saying that you should disbelieve. You shouldn't believe the proposition. It's so weak that you should disbelieve it. In fact, you've got evidence proving your proposition is probably false. In this case, this is a mismatch. The blue lines are not representing the principle of proportional belief. There should be a correspondence there like we had in the middle. Same deal with the yellow lines. Here you're saying, well, I disbelieve something very strongly. But once again, the evidence says that I should believe it. So there's that mismatch. No, what you want, the principle of proportional belief, is this red line. It's saying, look, well, the evidence is sufficient to say I should believe it, and I should believe it very, very strongly, not just weakly in terms of my level of credence, not just over here, but it's very, very strong evidence supporting the truth of the proposition. Well, the principle of proportional belief says on the belief line, the red line should be exactly corresponding and matching that level of evidence, that degree of evidence. You should very strongly believe that the proposition is true in accordance, in direct proportion with the evidence, the degree of evidence supporting the truth of that proposition. And it's got to be the same thing with the terms of disbelief. If the evidence, in this case, we're saying the evidence somewhat weakly or intermediately disproves the proposition. It proves the proposition is false or probably false. It's not really strong, but it's, kind of mid-tier. Maybe this is about 65% or 70%. The evidence disproves the proposition. Well, the principle of proportional belief says you've got to correspond. Your level, you should also disbelieve, and disbelieve with the same level of credence or disbelief to the same degree that the evidence warrants. So this is what the principle of proportional belief is saying in visual terms. Whatever attitude you adopt has to directly correspond with the degree of evidence. Whatever degree of disbelief or belief you have has to exactly correspond with the degree of evidence that you have for or against that proposition. So yeah, I hope that helps. Okay, cool. Now, just looking a little bit more at justification, we're almost done here. There is a position called philosophical skepticism, which you should be aware of. And basically, philosophical skepticism states that it says, look, there are indeed truth values, and those truth values can either be objective or subjective. So there are philosophical skeptics who are relativists. There are philosophical skeptics who are realists. There are no philosophical skeptics who are nihilists, right? They say there are truth values. They're either objective or subjective. We don't know. We don't care. But they deny that we're able to have justification. They say we can never know or have knowledge of what those true propositions are because we never have justification for them. And here's kind of an example of an argument that philosophical skeptics give to try and prove that we always lack justification for every single belief we have. Premise one, unless I am absolutely certain that I am not being deceived about reality as a whole and that I'm right, then all my beliefs lack justification. Premise two, I'm not absolutely certain that I'm not being deceived about reality as a whole. Conclusion, therefore, all my beliefs lack justification, and I know nothing because of that. Because knowledge is, again, a justified true belief. If you're lacking one or more of those criteria, if you have a true belief but you lack justification, you don't know. If you have justification but you have a false belief instead of a true belief, you don't know. So take out one of those elements, in this case, justification, and what you have is insufficient to claim propositional knowledge. Now, what are our responses to philosophical skeptics? Basically, these guys are ridiculous. They're skeptical to the point of foolishness. And virtually all philosophers, regardless of worldview, recognize this. They say that absolute certainty, ridiculous. That is not the standard for truth. That's not what we need to have before we can say we know something. And it's definitely not required for justification or knowledge. And they recognize knowledge can come in degrees, just like justification can come in degrees. And on that front, we have a response, well-known response in philosophy called fallibilism. This is a technical term. And fallibilism says that one can still be rational or justified or reasonable. Remember the principle of rational belief or justified belief or reasonable belief there, RJR belief. We can still be justified in believing something that is false, so long as one doesn't claim absolute certainty that that proposition is false, right? So fallibilism recognizes, look, I may believe that, I need better examples, but I may believe that Joe Biden is going to win, is a good president, right? But the fact of the matter is that that's totally false. This guy is horrible. He's probably the worst president in human history based on his record. And that's just an objective fact. Sorry to give my political biases away, but that man's just objectively the worst. He is horrible. But there are some fools out there who believe that Joe Biden is a good president and he's doing a good job and stuff like that. Now, what the principle of fallibilism is saying, look, those people out there, they may even be justified. Maybe they have good reasons for thinking Joe Biden's a good president. even though in reality we know it's false. That is a justified false belief, right? Because it doesn't correspond to reality. But yet, that's not a problem. We don't need 100% certainty or justification or knowledge before we can be justified in believing something, or before we can know something. There can be degrees of knowledge, or at the very least, there can be degrees of justification. So, yeah, fallibilism just recognizes the fact that it's possible to have justified false beliefs. And you're rational in believing something based on the evidence you're privy to, even if in the end, unbeknownst to you, it turns out that proposition turns out to be false. Now, what about an objection to universal or global philosophical skeptics? Once again, my favorite, it's self-defeating. It's self-refuting. I mean, look, it details that we know we can't know anything. So we know one thing, namely that we can only know zero things. 1 and 0, logical contradiction yet again. So yeah, and it also entails you have to be a skeptic about the above argument as well. So you can't know that this argument for philosophical skepticism is true. Bada boom, bada bing, you are destroyed. Philosophical skepticism is just viciously circular and leads nowhere. It's totally flawed. Okay, so I think this is going to be our last slide on justification, but this one's important to know, right? So we kind of looked at what justification is and got a sense of what it means to be rational, right? It means we follow the principle of belief, there are the 3 attitudes, and we follow the principle of rational or justified belief or reasonable belief, and we also follow the principle of proportional belief. But what does it mean to be irrational or unjustified in our beliefs? Well, there are a few ways this can happen. Here are some of them. The first is that we can have motivational errors, whereby we're unduly influenced by what we want to be true. Things like wishful thinking, stuff like that. Based on what in advance we want to be true or false, we're unduly influenced by that desire. And that comes at the expense of properly considering and weighing the relevant evidence, or even from considering the evidence as a whole. The heck with the evidence. I want Santa Claus to be true, so maybe it's true. That's called a motivational error. But there's also a second way that people are irrational and unjustified in their beliefs. And that's through a failure to weigh the evidence properly. And there are at least 4 ways of doing this. So the first is to just straight up ignore some of the relevant available evidence. So here's an example, right? So let's say you're a detective and you're investigating a murder. You look at all of the evidence in the living room where the body is, but you totally neglect to look at the stairs or in the hallway or in the bedroom. And unbeknownst to you, there's relevant available evidence there, because the murder started in the bedroom and they dragged the body all the way down. There's blood on the stairs and all this. You just say, nope, I've got my blinders on. Only what's in the living room. That's the only evidence I'm going to focus on. Well, that's going to lead you to be irrational. That's unjustified on your part, because you're ignoring evidence that's available and relevant to having a proper conclusion. Part B, the second way, is by undervaluing contrary evidence, right? So in this case, you don't just straight up ignore some of the relevant evidence. You look at all of the available relevant evidence, but when it comes to the contrary evidence, the evidence that goes against what you want to hear, you underemphasize it, you undervalue it, and say, that's not a big deal. This is called disconfirmation bias, right? Giving less weight to and or being excessively critical of evidence that proves the opposite of what you want to be true. So for example, alcoholics, they don't necessarily ignore the evidence, right? They can be confronted and hear, hey, look, you're causing problems for our kids, you're scaring our kids, you need an intervention, like you're wasting all of our money on booze and all this stuff. They don't necessarily ignore that evidence. They hear it and recognize it and acknowledge it, but they just undervalue it. They dismiss, oh, that's no big deal. I can handle it. I'm in control and stuff like that. Don't worry about the finances. I can stop whenever I need to. Thirdly, you can overvalue confirming evidence, and this is what's known as the confirmation bias. So this is where you give more weight and or you're insufficiently critical of evidence that proves what you want to hear, proves that you want to be true. So for example, you might think that, hey, my gosh, this guy or girl text messaged me and responded to my text. That must mean they want to date me. They really like me, just like I like them. Yeah, yay! Like you. In this case, no. The evidence is they returned your text message. That can mean a whole host of things. That doesn't entail that they want to date you. So in that case, you're engaging in confirmation bias. You're overvaluing that confirmation evidence. It could mean they want to date you, or it could mean they want to be friends with you, or it could mean, hey, I'm using you. I need help on my homework, so I'm returning the text message so I can get some answers from you. It all just depends, right? And then lastly, we have a special kind of overvaluing evidence. In this case, it's slightly different. So it's overvaluing psychologically available evidence. Okay, so what's the difference in this case? So what is that? It's basically giving too much weight to memorable, striking, dramatic, or vivid evidence, stuff that psychologically, it rattles your brain and it sticks in your head and it really makes a difference. Now, what's the difference with C? Well, in C above, when we're overvaluing confirming evidence, confirming being the key word, prior to looking at the evidence, we've already got what I want to be true, right? I want to believe that person likes me. I want to believe in Santa Claus or God, or I want to believe that Richard Dawkins is a good person and not a godless atheist or something like that. In that case, you've got an agenda in advance before you look at the evidence, and it's skewing, that bias is skewing, or agenda is skewing how you view the evidence and weigh it. In this case, you don't necessarily have an agenda or a bias in advance, right? It doesn't entail that you had to have this belief or desire to believe something before you encountered the evidence itself. So it's not confirming a prior belief, so to speak. Instead, it's forming a totally new evidence by overvaluing the new evidence for this new belief because it's striking, psychologically speaking. So for example, maybe I believe that flying in an airplane is dangerous or swimming in the ocean is just dangerous. Why? Because, well, as a kid, my mom died in a plane crash, and that was so psychologically jarring for me. I just overvalued that anecdotal evidence over and against all the statistical evidence proving that flying is perfectly safe. In fact, it's statistically speaking safer than driving in a car. But you just don't care because you're overvaluing the psychologically available anecdotal evidence that your mom died in a plane crash when you were a kid. It's impacted your biases. Or let's say as a kid you were mortified by watching the movie Jaws, and there's going to be sharks in the ocean. You can never go in the ocean. No, but all the evidence proves there's virtually no shark attacks that ever happen from swimming in the ocean. They're extremely rare. Yeah, but I saw Jaws and it made an impact on me. It was so memorable, so dramatic. I don't care about your evidence. The movie Jaws evidence is proof that it's dangerous to go in the ocean. I will never set foot in the ocean. In that case, you're overvaluing psychologically available evidence. So yeah, that covers it in terms of today's lecture. It was a little bit longer than last time, but we've now completed Unit 1 of the course. There was only 2 lectures for Unit 1, which was basically our introduction to critical thinking, as you can see. Next time, we're going to move into some of the nuts and bolts. We're going to go back to looking at arguments in a little bit more detail. We learned what the elements of an argument were in Lecture 1. Let's now look at Unit 2 and some of the characteristics, and specifically classification of different types of arguments and argument patterns and that sort of thing. So that's what we'll be starting to do next time in Lecture 3. Thank you for listening, and I hope it was helpful.